It's not financially sustainable, and it's just not the right things to do to human beings. If we build this system, if we've had 212,000 people still in our care, preventive steps were taken. People should not be in shelters their entire lives.
Part of the city's 60-day shelter limit, but the city insists parents and children won't be left out on the street.
That kind of speaks to the complexity of this issue, right? We have seen the city grapple with this for quite some time now. The city is once again reassuring these families that they are not just kicking them out and saying, hey, get out of here. So migrant families now mostly live in about 150 or so shelters.
New York City is giving $4,000 grants to migrant families staying in city shelters in an effort to move them into permanent housing. The city has spent more than $5 billion in the past 2 years on migrant care costs. The city is struggling with space as 65,000 migrants are currently in shelters. This program is meant to alleviate some of those costs by incentivizing migrants to move.
The city's Department of Homeless Services has quietly rolled out a program that gives 150 migrant families up to $4,000 each to help them move out of shelters and into permanent housing, officials confirmed. This initiative, called Azali Move Out Assistance, is aimed at asylum-seeking families and pregnant women living in 62 emergency shelters who've secured their own places. Launched back in December with little fanfare, the program is a pilot effort designed to reduce the number of migrants in shelters and help them make the next step in their lives, as Mayor Eric Adams puts it. It's similar to an existing city program that offers one-time grants for moving costs, but some asylum seekers don't qualify for that due to various restrictions. The city shelter census has been stuck around 65,000 for months, despite a drop in new arrivals. Since 2022, the city has welcomed over 210,000 migrants, spending a staggering $5 billion in the process. Neha Sharma, a spokesperson for the department, said they're using every tool they can to help those who may not be eligible for federal or state housing assistance. The funds for this program come from leftover budgets meant for nonprofit shelter operators who also manage the grant distribution. Eligible families can use the grants for moving expenses, security deposits, rent, and even household supplies. Plus, they get gift cards worth up to $1,000 for essentials. Payments go directly to moving companies and landlords, and families must keep receipts. Since this is a one-time deal, those who end up back in shelters can't apply again. The Adams administration has been trying out various programs to support asylum seekers, like giving prepaid debit cards for buying food instead of traditional meal boxes, which has been both praised and criticized. Josh Goldfein, a staff attorney for legal aid, is on board with the new move-out grants and believes they're a great way to help families settle into their new communities. It's a proactive approach rather than just slapping on time limits, he said. Destroying New York City. It's been a year since Mayor Eric Adams declared at a town hall that the migrant crisis would destroy New York City. Since the first buses rolled in from Texas back in spring 2022, over 216,000 migrants have passed through the city. But surprisingly, this might not end up being the biggest disaster of the Adams administration. The mayor sounded the alarm long before things got shaky for him. Before his police commissioner had to resign, his chief counsel quit with a resignation note saying she could no longer effectively serve, and before two former fire chiefs were busted on bribery charges. Sure, the influx of people fleeing tough situations in Latin America and West Africa has put a strain on the system, but it hasn't broken it. In fact, from the start, the crisis has shown how ordinary New Yorkers are willing to step up and help, even when the City Hall rhetoric feels anything but encouraging. Take Ilse Thielman, for instance. By December 2022, she transformed her network of volunteers from 10 to 800, with most meeting new arrivals at the Port Authority bus terminal every day to provide hot meals, clothing, and transportation. She even charged $50,000 worth of pizza, donuts, and bus tickets to her credit card, unsure when she'd get reimbursed by organizations like United Way. In a city that the mayor often praises as the city of yes, the political response has felt a bit less warm and fuzzy. A year after those bleak comments, it's clear there's a disconnect in how his administration is handling the situation, treating it as both an emergency and an unsolvable problem. On the flip side, Liz Garcia, the mayor's deputy press secretary, pointed out that due to their case management and resettlement efforts, over 150,000 migrants have left New York's shelter system, taking steps towards self-sufficiency. So there's a bit of hope amid the chaos.
The city awarding up to $4,000 grants to migrant families who exit the shelter system and find their own housing.
Shelter is an emergency solution that is intended for the short term. We've done 150 families starting about 7 months ago. It is important that that short-term solution is safe and healthy and that we are providing. I think we have had one person from a family, not even the whole family, come back. So that is, in my mind, a very strong success rate. Really is for documented expenses related to permanent housing. So that could be first and last month's rent. It could be moving expenses. The shelter providers are really looking at documentation that makes financial sense because shelter is very expensive and this is a targeted one-time payment.
What is self-sufficiency? Figuring out what self-sufficiency actually looks like for migrants is a bit of a mystery. Back in October, the city dropped a new rule saying migrant families had to leave shelters after 60 days, or 30 days for singles, and reapply for housing. But a report from City Comptroller Brad Lander revealed that the city isn't tracking how many migrants are finding stable homes or getting on their feet. In an email, Deputy Press Secretary Liz Garcia insisted that the city is handling this humanitarian crisis with care and compassion, and claimed no families with kids have had to sleep on the streets. While that's commendable, it overlooks the fact that plenty of single adults have been left out in the cold. It raises the question, should we focus on avoiding negative outcomes or actually work to fully integrate thousands of newcomers into the city's life, as New York has done for generations? Ruth Messinger, former Manhattan Borough president and now in her 80s, has been on the ground meeting migrants since the early days of the crisis. As a board member of the Interfaith Center of New York, she's become something of an unofficial migrant czar, regularly meeting with city officials and relaying what she sees. When you bring a case to the city, they usually respond and help, but every issue is just a small part of a much larger problem that needs a systemic approach, she said. Migrants face 3 main hurdles to integration: securing housing, getting work permits, and enrolling their kids in school. And don't forget the language barriers. With around 64,000 migrants in the city's shelter system, many don't even have a reliable mailing address due to all the moving around. While some churches and synagogues let folks receive mail, Messinger argues it would be way more efficient for the city to set up designated mail spots. We're not just talking birthday cards here, she said. Some folks are missing important letters from the Department of Education about their kids. The shelter rules also make it tricky for kids to get an education, even though the city tries to keep families in the same borough as their school when they reapply for shelter. Naveed Hassan, a city school board member and co-founder of a group called D3 Open Arms, pointed out that teachers are struggling. After dealing with COVID and remote learning, having a constantly changing roster makes it impossible for schools to function, he said. Crisis often creates opportunities. Take fourth-year med students who stepped up during the height of COVID. Zelnor Myrie, a Brooklyn lawyer and state senator who's running against Adams in the 2025 mayoral primary, had a novel idea to speed up work permits for migrants. He suggested the city create its own permits, given the lengthy federal process. I thought we had legal grounds to do this since we're facing an emerging challenge and not getting much help from the feds, he said. City Hall looked into it, but ultimately shelved the idea because no other city had tried it before. To tackle this crisis effectively, we need to flip the narrative from one of disaster to one of opportunity. Messinger suggested that the mayor should highlight immigrant success stories more often. A third of the city council has immigrant roots, she pointed out. Simple messaging can be powerful. Plus, getting help for newcomers who speak languages like Wolof or Pular could be as easy as the mayor asking for volunteers on NY1. But let's be real, crises can also become convenient scapegoats. When something goes wrong, immigrants often get blamed, Messinger said. The city budget is $112 billion. Can't we use a slice of that for forward-thinking solutions?
New York City is giving $4,000 grants to migrant families staying in city shelters in an effort to move them into permanent housing. The city has spent more than $5 billion in the past 2 years on migrant care costs. The city is struggling with space as 65,000 migrants are currently in shelters. This program is meant to alleviate some of those costs by incentivizing migrants to move and spends $388 per day per migrant household. So far, 150 families have benefited from the grant program. To qualify, migrants would need to first secure their own housing outside of the shelter. More than 350,000 people are homeless in New York City as of June of this year, and provide documentation like a lease or rental agreement. 130,000 are sleeping inside city shelters. Last year, New York City Mayor Eric Adams said the city would end up spending more on migrants.
Latest subpoena. This week, things got a bit spicy for New York City Mayor Eric Adams as federal authorities issued a subpoena to Molly Schaefer, the head of the Office of Asylum Seeker Operations. The specifics of what the feds want from her remain a mystery, and it's unclear if this is connected to the broader investigations swirling around Adams. When reached out for comments, Schaefer passed the ball to Adams' deputy mayor, Fabian Levy, who opted to stay tight-lipped about the ongoing probes. He did mention that they expect full cooperation from everyone involved and praised Schaefer as a crucial team member, stressing she hasn't been accused of any wrongdoing. Earlier this month, things escalated as federal agents also seized the phones of several top officials in Adams' administration, including his school's chancellor and 2 deputy mayors. Even the newly resigned police commissioner Edward Cabin, who stepped down citing distractions caused by recent developments, had his phone confiscated. Cabin, who made history as the first Latino police commissioner, resigned just 15 months into his role. This all comes on the heels of a subpoena Adams himself received in July, demanding info about his schedule, international trips, and ties to the Turkish government. It's definitely a rocky time in City Hall, so stay tuned for future updates.